Okay, welcome to The Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. My name is Brad Listi, and I am here in Los Angeles, California. It's great to be with you. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. So my guest today is Claire Hoffman, author of a new book called Sister Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson. It is available from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, and it is a superb book about a quintessentially American figure. Never mind the fact that Aimee Semple McPherson is actually Canadian. I feel like there's something very American about her and her story in its totality. For those of you who don't know who Aimee Semple McPherson was, she was, in the early 20th century, America's most famous evangelist. And she was, in so many ways, a visionary, a woman who was having great success in a field that was, and continues to be, typically dominated by men. She stood at the nexus of religion and entertainment and mass media at a time when Los Angeles was the fastest growing city on earth and Hollywood was in its early infancy. It was in its ascendance as a cultural capital. Aimee Semple McPherson, with the help of her very shrewd mother, was an incredibly sophisticated marketer who used spectacle and storytelling and the latest in technology, including her own radio station, to bring the gospel to the masses. She also helped bring Pentecostalism into the mainstream. She was a forebear to modern televangelists, and she shaped the future of American Christianity. Her Angelus Temple in the Echo Park neighborhood of Los Angeles can fairly be called the first megachurch, and her Foursquare Church continues to exist to this day with more than 8 million congregants around the world. That said, Aimee Semple McPherson's life was not without controversy and heartbreak and mystery. As Claire Hoffman writes about so beautifully in her new book, Aimee Semple McPherson's mysterious disappearance in 1926, followed by her dramatic reappearance a month later in the Mexican desert, electrified the world and was a cause for great controversy and was a lens into the great complexities that converged in Aimee's personal life, her public persona, and her work. I had such a fascinating talk with Claire Hoffman, who is returning to this program for a second time. She first appeared in episode 417 back in June of 2016 when she was celebrating the publication of her memoir, Greetings from Utopia Park, which is about her childhood growing up in Iowa in the Transcendental Meditation community in Fairfield, founded by the late Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. My conversation with Claire Hoffman is coming up in just a couple of minutes. Today's episode is brought to you by Harper Books, publisher of So Far Gone, the hotly anticipated new novel by Jess Walter. So Far Gone is the official June pick of the Otherppl Book Club. That is my book club. If you would like to sign up for my book club, you can do so over at the show's official website, otherppl.com. You get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I interview book club authors on this program. So you will be hearing from Jess Walter in the not-too-distant future. So Far Gone is the latest from the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Beautiful Ruins and The Cold Millions. This is a hilarious and poignant adventure story about a reclusive journalist named Rhys Kinnick who is racing to save his kidnapped grandchildren. It's a novel that combines humor and heart and social commentary in the spirit of Charles Portis's True Grit. It is a road trip style exploration of cultural chaos and second chances in modern America. This is a wonderful book. Again, it is called So Far Gone by Jess Walter, available from Harper Books. A quick reminder about my weekly email newsletter. I would love it if you would sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. It's a great way to keep up with this program. I will let you know about the latest episodes of the show. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So sign up for my newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. Also want to give a quick plug to Deep Dive, my new company, which will be launching later this year. Deep Dive specializes in the creation of long-form educational audio, and the debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. I am the host of the course, and it features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard instruction from dozens of today's leading writers, including Melissa Broder, Emily St. John Mandel, Matt Bell, Matthew Salisis, Antoine Wilson, Purchista Hakpur, Vivi Ganesh, Shananthan, Madeline Lucas, Hannah Pittard, Lynn Steger Strong. Who else? Deb Olin Unferth. There's dozens. There's never been a writing course quite like this one in terms of size and scope, and I'm really proud of it. I'm in the process of sorting everything out. I'm hoping for midsummer, but it might be early fall when this thing finally launches. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a technology aspect. You can imagine. I'm trying to get it all situated, but it's coming. Again, the company is called Deep Dive. The debut course is How to Write a Novel. If you want to sign up for the wait list, go to www.deepdive.audio. I will keep you posted via the Deep Dive newsletter. I will also keep you posted here on the Otherppl show. So my guest, once again, is Claire Hoffman. Her new book is called Sister Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson, available from FSG. Claire is a longtime journalist who has reported for a variety of national magazines on culture, religion, celebrity, business, and more. She was formerly a staff reporter for the Los Angeles Times and Rolling Stone, and I'm very happy to welcome her back onto the Otherppl show to talk with me about her excellent new book. So let's get to it. Here I am with Claire Hoffman.
She was somebody who was, maybe a paragraph in a American religious history book that I read when I was in divinity school at Chicago. And she was called out for being sort of one of the founders of Christian entertainment, that she had started one of the first Christian radio stations, that she had started arguably the first mega church. And it just seemed like, whoa, that's like kind of crazy that a woman that I've never heard of had done all these things, and that hadn't been part of my American history, let's say. I knew who Billy Graham was, I knew who Billy Sunday was, but I just had never heard of her. And I'd spent a lot of time in Los Angeles because my dad was living here when I was growing up. So yeah, it just kind of caught my eye. And then when I was working at the Los Angeles Times, I would drive by the Angelus Temple every day. It's on Echo Park Lake, and just is such a funny, weird building, it's like what's going on there. And often, because the Dream Center is next door, there would be people.
Wait, what's the Dream Center?
The Dream Center is like their kind of nonprofit arm. There's a complex story of how another church kind of got combined into theirs. So the Dream Center does a lot of their outreach. So like, for example, this year they've done a ton of stuff for the fires. Like Tony Robbins has funneled, I think, $1 million through the Dream Center to fire victims. Ryan Seacrest also did it. Ivanka Trump was like out there in the parking lot giving away food and money to people after the fire. So it's this big social outreach arm of the Angelus Temple and the Foursquare Church. And I actually remember I had this guy who I loved, who sadly passed away last year, Kim Christensen, who I think won like 3 Pulitzers. He was this amazing investigative reporter at the LA Times who I worked with on a Scientology series. And I remember driving by there with him once, and he was like, there's a fucking story. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
You are indeed.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, what's up with the Dream Center? And I remember him saying, like, you know, there's always all these people outside and they're always giving money away, but there's something there, you know? And so anyway, it was just, you know, I mean, a lot of like books just kind of build for me. I'm very slow and I like to think about things for a super long time before I take any action whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, that's all, you know, kind of early aughts. And I went on with my life, and at some point I was living in Venice, around after I finished my first book, and she kind of came up again. I was doing ocean swimming, and I heard the story of her disappearing while she went swimming in the ocean, swimming laps in 1926. And that kind of blew my mind. Like, wait, this really important religious figure that I never learned about, who's fundamental to 20th century American Christianity, was also a woman swimming laps alone in the Pacific in 1926. Like, I don't swim laps alone. So all of that just kind of made me interested. And at that point I bought like all the books on her, which there are a fair amount of books that have been written. I mean, she's been like written, there's a biography, I would say, like every other generation. People kind of contend with her because she's got this sort of looking glass quality to her, right? Like she's a funny mirror on who we are. And yeah, she's funny like that. So the one from the 1930s that I read was like just absolutely scathing, right? I mean, she was still alive when this was written, and it was written by a female journalist from Oakland, and she just like cannot like say a single fact about Aimee without like just tearing her apart. You know, I mean, she's like, Aimee is a con artist and a hustler, and you know, P.T. Barnum every instant. You know, it's all like a clown show. And then you know, there's a book from the 60s that's very like Valley of the Dolls, you know, like kind of like Mother No, you know, and like swilling drinks and like slapping each other after their plastic surgery. I mean, which is like all real, you know, but like made up dialogue and fascinating. But, you know, that was sort of the 60s, 70s version, which I think is like how the Faye Dunaway, Betty Davis TV show came about in the 70s. And then there's two books from the 90s. And anyway, to speed up the story, I like in reading them all in aggregate, I kind of just had this feeling like I wasn't seeing the full person. Like that these, in particular, like these ideas of what a woman could or couldn't be was so restrictive in the narrative. You know what I mean? And so, you know, even the ones from the 90s, like they're really divided. One is written by a religious historian who was herself, I believe, a Pentecostal. And, you know, the kidnapping section in that book, Aimee's Scandal and Disappearance, is, you know, a single paragraph, right? And then, you know, there's another book that was written like more of a general history for a popular audience book, and it's good. And he had access still to living people, which was amazing. But, you know, he's sort of armchair psychologizing divine healing and sort of putting in pop science and, you know, kind of, it was like almost sort of too, not like looking at the hard things that Aimee dealt with, I would say, which I felt like was just a big piece of furniture in the room that no one was acknowledging. Like, I mean, of course her actions are incredible and absurd and wild, but also the world that she was moving in was like that too, you know? So I felt sort of called to engage with that.
She's an incredibly rich subject for a biography and a totally fascinating figure who encompasses so much about, I think, American life, I guess life in general, but American life in particular, Los Angeles life in particular. She seems like, with the benefit of hindsight, to be predictive of so much that we have seen play out over the course of our lifetimes, like late 20th century into the 21st century. And she was kind of a huckster but she was also, I think, really sincere in a lot of ways and really gifted and visionary in her approach in ways that she deserves some credit for. Like she seemed to predict the integration of religion and media, like mass media, in a manner that sort of calls to mind like a great entrepreneur. It's not that she invented this stuff. It's that she, I think, invented the combinations of these things in the way that like Steve Jobs invented the combination of like your phone and your television and like a jukebox. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
oh, totally. Yeah. Like I was like watching The Wolf of Wall Street or that funny movie about the Swiffer lady, when I was writing it. Like, I think it is actually, you could not care about religion at all and be really interested in her story because it is kind of an American entrepreneur and somebody who really saw her audience and shaped her message and her offering for her audience. So, I mean, that's where it's like Huckster, it's like she was, she always said, I want the largest microphone possible, like you, Brad, with your microphone.
That's right.
She also wanted a big microphone. She would love that microphone.
But so it's a wonderful microphone, by the way.
Big, beautiful. But that was what she wanted. She was really clear about it. And I mean, I think there's also, like, as a woman, I kind of loved the sleight of hand of her ambition and her mother's ambition. I mean, it's in some ways it's the two of them for quite a bit of the story. And the sleight of hand is like, oh, it's not for me, it's for Jesus, and you can kind of really, you get a lot of runway out of that. You can really go far with that. And I think, like women certainly 100 years ago have a hard time foregrounding their ambition and being, sort of nakedly ambitious, so to speak. Right. But she was like, it's all for Jesus. And in his name, she was able to achieve so much. I think that kind of sense of purpose and like being chosen in some way really propelled her to like these incredible heights. And I think it's like, it's more exciting when it's somebody who had so many odds stacked against them,
Well, yeah. And we should go back to the beginning and just talk about like how far she traveled to get to where she ultimately did. And, just to make sure that people listening have context, like her peak as a public person and as like a major religious figure in the United States and globally was in like the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
So this was like roaring 20s and like Depression era America. And she was based at that point in Los Angeles, but she began in a small town in Ontario and comes from humble beginnings.
Yeah. I mean, like any great American success story, it starts in Canada.
Right.
See Justin Bieber. They're weirdly from like almost like very close places. They're like 60 miles apart or something.
He's also a very religious guy, isn't he?
Yeah. Somebody told me that it's like him and Billie Eilish both went to Foursquare churches. I mean, they're everywhere. Aimee's church. But anyway, yeah, she was born in 1890 and, she was an only child to her father's second marriage. Her mother was a teenage housekeeper for her father, whose wife had recently passed away. And her mother was very involved with the Salvation Army, which is really interesting. It's right at the beginning of the Salvation Army. It had just come to America and Canada from England. And it was people would have considered it a cult back then, like a very kind of radical, fringy, wild, very performative Christian faith that did a lot of outreach and also really uplifted women, which is important. So, these elements of like women being able to be involved, to rise up in the ranks and to just have like a really strong sense of purpose within the organization were something that her mom passed along to her. But she, definitely when she was a teenager started getting into like being popular and pretty and started reading Darwin and having questions. And, her life, if she were telling the story of her life, she would begin there because, when she was 16, 17 years old, she walked into a little church in her hometown one night with her dad, just like on a lark to go make fun of what they called the Holy Rollers, this like sort of visiting group of a new religious movement that was happening. And she walks in and it's this, super hot Irish tall preacher with like black hair and blue eyes. And she's sort of thunderstruck.
And this was Robert Semple.
This was Robert Semple. And he had just himself converted to Pentecostalism, so this is at the end of 1907. The start of Pentecostalism is pegged to spring of 1906 in Los Angeles. So it's a pretty close, if the butterfly is flapping its wings in downtown Los Angeles in April of 1906 with William Seymour, who was an African-American preacher who led these revivals that, sort of went on for months, and people, the signature of Pentecostalism is speaking in tongues and divine healing and this like sort of physical manifestation of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. There was a white guy from Chicago who came to see William Seymour preach, and that guy left, went back to Chicago and taught a hot Irish shoe sales clerk from Marshall Fields about Pentecostalism. And that was Robert Semple, who then made his way up to Canada and taught Aimee. So there you go.
And like who was like ordaining these people? Do you know what I'm saying?
They're ordaining each other.
That's how it starts.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
So she becomes
the Holy Spirit, Brad.
That's right.
Wrong answer.
That's right.
Got that wrong.
But they, the other thing too is that I guess Pentecostal ministers could marry, they could couple. I was raised Catholic, and it was like priests. The priesthood it's verboten to have any kind of relationship with anyone. Other than I guess like a priestly relationship. So
how's that working out?
Yeah, I was going to say. But Robert and Aimee get married, and he converts her to Pentecostalism. So this is the beginning.
Well, she would say the Holy Spirit. She has a experience. She's like washed in the Holy Spirit, and it comes into her one night after she learns about it. And so it's not him so much as like he shows her the way, and the Holy Spirit has his way with her.
Intervenes.
Yes. Gets in there.
And so then they end up in Chicago. And is William Durham the guy that was out in Los Angeles with Seymour or whatever?
Yeah.
And so they go to Chicago to join the Full Gospel Assembly, which is run by William Durham. And they're there for a bit, and I guess like moving up the ranks and getting to know the community. And then they become missionaries.
Yeah, you did a really good job reading. This is impressing me. Wait, that's the name of the church? I don't even remember.
I have notes. But
I was like, this is my worst fear that I'll be quizzed on things from my book.
No, yeah, exactly. I've written, I get that. You like don't even remember what you did. But
I mean, there's a lot of footnotes.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a big life. And they end up in Hong Kong, and they both come down with malaria. I got to say too, that one of the funniest lines in the whole book, and it's not like by nature like a comedic book.
I was going to say, not a lot of competition for them.
Yeah. But they show up in Hong Kong in the early 20th century as Pentecostal missionaries, and they're joined there. Like there are other missionaries, I guess, in town. One of whom is a guy from North Carolina who had a conversion experience, maybe similar to Aimee's, where the Holy Spirit overtook him and he started speaking in tongues in North Carolina. And he's possessed by this, and he wants to join the church and spread the word. And he's convinced that the tongues that he was speaking in, that he was speaking Chinese. Mm-hmm. And so he goes to Hong Kong and like gets off the boat.
Yeah.
And starts
like, hey,
He's like, "Hey, I'm here," and he couldn't. He was like crestfallen that nobody could understand him.
It's so fun to imagine being like a person in Hong Kong, and like this like strange white guy comes up and starts making these sounds to you.
It seems to me, I'm like, this is a Coen Brothers movie. Like, this needs to be.
Really, there is almost, I mean, it's tragic, some of her life, but there is also this kind of screwball nature to it, like it's
totally
kind of an unraveling. And I think it's a big life, I think. So there's just a lot of wildness. And I think there's also kind of it's such an incredible moment in time. I mean, this is the height of the missionary movement, and it's before, I think, the missionaries got kicked out of China. So it's just, the sense of purpose is incredible. And they're like, really into the numbers of it, right? Like going to China is just the numbers of souls they can save, they're like almost greedy about it. Like, like we're just going to be harvesting all these souls is the language they use. But yeah, very quickly it goes south, and Robert Semple ends up dying of malaria, and Aimee is pregnant and ends up having their baby in Hong Kong alone in the hospital where he died, a month or so later. And it's really like, that's her. I mean, she has a number of rock bottoms, but that is, this sort of moment that she would point to in her life over and over again, where she was laid low and ultimately lifted up. And, she would credit Jesus, but actually also it was her mother who took up a collection and helped get her back to America.
When this book becomes the source material for a biopic, which I'm very much hoping that it does, whoever plays Minnie McPherson, Aimee's mother, is going to win the Academy Award. It's a lock.
It's the best.
She's like the because like, what it is to me, like she's the prototypical momager.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm sure there were other momagers, in that era, but like she had to be one of the earliest iterations of this, and she was totally essential to her daughter's rise. That would not have happened without her.
I don't think anyone else amassed a real estate empire the way that Minnie did. And, Minnie, like maybe was carrying a gun, but was also taking care of the kids. Like she just was doing everything. And just to totally skip ahead, there's this part, this moment towards the end of her life where her and her mother are at odds, and they're in court, and her mom, Minnie, carries a box with her every day to court that she says is full of files about Aimee. And she never opens them or shows them, but she just carries the box in and out of the courtroom. And I just like, it's like a metaphor. Like you're like, that is a mother, right? They're like, this is a box full of receipts about how you're actually the worst person. I'm not going to open it, but that I have it.
Yeah. I mean, just like an incredible figure in her own right. Yeah. And the thing about them too, is that, for all of like there's a part of me that I think just reflexively recoils. People start speaking in tongues. People start evangelizing. People start like moving to other countries, like talking about harvesting souls. I recoil. There's a part of me, with my like kind of like unhappy experience as a Catholic child who's just like, no, I'm not doing this. But there is also a sincerity and an earnestness and a deep, like true belief that I feel like Aimee had. That certainly comes across in your book. Is that how you would characterize it?
Yeah, and that was really important to me because I think that she was a true believer. And I think that's part of what's so interesting about her and what happened to her is that she believed completely. And, those years, so she comes back to America. She gets a second husband who's sort of mediocre. She has
this is Harold McPherson.
Harold McPherson. Yeah.
Who's kind of a dud. He's kind of a dud.
He's kind of a dud. Although my husband Ben is like weirdly he comes up a lot. Like I've seen him like he comes up in the reviews. Like people are kind of latch on to Harold, and Ben has this theory that like every man is like, oh, I am afraid that I am Harold McPherson.
I cannot confirm nor deny whether
exactly.
I related to Harold.
I know. Anyway, yeah, he was a real regular guy, but he also kind of wanted her to be a regular person, which really backfired. But to answer your question, she ends up traveling what they call the Sawdust Trail, but this area in the South and up the eastern seaboard where ministers were traveling and preaching. And, Harold leaves and she's with her mother and her two kids, and they're living, meal to meal, and they don't know, where the money's going to come from. And they're
like sleeping in fields.
Yeah.
Right?
They're sleeping in fields. They're crossing rivers. They're, camping out. They're building they're homeless, they're building, little Christmas trees out of sticks, they're praying and getting a can of food, and I think it was really important to me to include that because I think it is kind of a testament to her sincerity and also this kind of youthful rapture that I saw in her. She really was kind of, before she was spellbinding, I would say she was kind of spellbound, that was part of her power. People talk a lot about her charisma, her marketing prowess, which are all very real. But I also think she was inside her own experience, and her power, especially in those early years, was being inside of that experience and translating it for an audience. And what she was feeling seemed very big and very powerful.
Yeah. You're not camping in a field in Florida and holding tent,
No.
revivals or whatever.
No.
Unless you really believe what you're doing, or you're just extremely desperate or something. But I just felt to me like she was on a true mission, in her own mind. And I have to say too, that I believe it's this section of the book and this part of Aimee's life where we begin to see her racial politics, which I also feel like were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
She would minister to Black audiences. I think in Florida, it had to be separate.
Yeah.
Just because of Florida, the Florida of it all back then.
Yeah. Yes.
But
the Florida of it all.
Later in Los Angeles at Angelus Temple, it was an integrated congregation. She welcomed all comers, right?
Yes. Yeah. And she was especially in Los Angeles, she did a ton of outreach to the Mexican American community, which was really growing at that time. I think there were just a ton of people coming up from Mexico in the teens and 20s. And it was very divided, the city. And she would do tons of outreach. She would translate. She got a translator. That sort of comes later in the book. But yeah, so, this is why she's kind of fantastic, is that you could celebrate her for so many things, she was really. And it's interesting because that thing about her ambition and her sense of Jesus, her sense of Jesus and the gospel also allowed a certain kind of bigness that almost would read as progressive, right? But it also, she was not a feminist, for example, she didn't fight for suffrage. She wasn't a supporter vocally of the women's movement. She was kind of slippery in that way, I would say. So
and not at all she was not a really overtly political person.
She wasn't. There were things that she cared about. She wanted evolution to stop being taught in public schools in California. And she was against drinking and dancing in Venice. That was one of the theories about her kidnapping or alleged kidnapping, was that it had been done by the underworld because she had been political about some of those things. And later on, she would do debates. She did debates with Sinclair Lewis on, I believe, on evolution And
didn't she she was like, I think a supporter of, and I'm blanking on the name, in the Scopes trial.
William Jennings Bryan. Yeah.
William Jennings Bryan.
He came to Los Angeles a couple of times and supported her. Yeah. So they were pals. So she wasn't apolitical, but she kind of chose her issues, and she would sort of deftly avoid, topics she didn't want to talk about, I would say.
So 1918, we kind of left her in a field in Florida,
right?
like sleeping in the in the dirt or whatever with her kids and her mom. And this has got to be an uncomfortable way to live. I mean, this is also, they're in an automobile in the 1920s. I mean, this is like very primitive.
Yeah, 1918.
So then the marriage with Harold is kind of on the rocks, right? He's like not happy.
Yeah.
Playing second fiddle to her and kind of being on the road. I think he takes off, and then Aimee starts to head west around this time. Is that right?
Yeah, he takes off and her mom comes down, and her mom sort of right there's this like early moment of business savvy, right? Like the business savvy really was her mother, because before that, when she was traveling with Harold, they were extremely poor, and there wasn't, a lot of, it was like, I'm going to pray for, the money for the thread to fix the tent, and the tent will get fixed. It's not, there's no big dream. But her mother came down to Florida, and she started doing a thing like where people would, Aimee was starting to be a known quantity and popular, and her mother would, answer letters and say like, yes, she would love to come and preach for you if you could just send $10 in advance, like she would secure a retainer. And Aimee had started a magazine in 1916, and Minnie was very good at like collecting names and addresses and checks to build the subscription base. So as they head west, they're also like stopping in towns along the way and kind of building this national following and national subscription base, which would, be in their service for decades to come. So that's like a thing to know about it, just in terms of the business story, is that her mother sort of figured out how to survive at that point. But even, they come to Los Angeles, and, Aimee, her ministry is growing, but she has this sense that Los Angeles is going to be her home, that is the place
angels.
She's been divinely called. And she's such you were talking earlier about, as an Angelino, feeling like, oh, this is so prophetic, but it's prophetic because she actually, so much of how she saw the city and how her actions inside the city really have shaped the city. Like, she is kind of a founding parent. So there's so much about her and her story that are integral to Los Angeles today, I would say.
I just want to say, the drive west to get to Los Angeles, that entailed like the Spanish flu. I think that pandemic of 1918, which both she and her daughter Roberta got, and I think her relatively easy recovery from it was also like received as like another like divine nudge, right? Like, I'm just meant to continue west.
Yeah.
And she gets to Los Angeles, and like you say, her mother is beginning to understand that her daughter is getting traction and is figuring out ways to capitalize on it and to kind of build a business out of it and a ministry out of it. And what it calls to mind for me is influencers. Mm-hmm. This just feels like an earlier iteration of what an influencer is. Aimee Semple McPherson in this era would be like viral on TikTok. I'm almost certain of it. And her mother would be like the one cutting the videos on CapCut or whatever, and doing all the little like social media of it all. But that's what was happening. And then she gets to Los Angeles in, I guess, 1918, the end of 1918.
Yeah.
And I'm endlessly fascinated with this in the context of Aimee Semple McPherson, but also just broadly speaking. And it has to do with timing, like the timing of it all, the place, the time, the context, what's happening on the ground in Los Angeles. Like, certain figures just meet their moment perfectly. And it's not like it happens automatically. Like there's a lot of effort involved and a lot of ingenuity. But this intersection of religion and Los Angeles and the rise of the film and television industry and radio, all the mass media that were kind of ascendant at that time in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles itself was just such a boom town. It was the fastest growing city on earth, I think, at that time.
Yep. In the history of Earth.
And there she was, and she was the one, and credit to her, who sort of was able to take advantage of all of those things and to kind of live at that nexus and to build something new from these kind of disparate pieces. And the other thing that you wrote about in your book that was maybe less obvious but really hit me was the fact that because it was a boom town and there were so many people kind of like moving to LA, a lot of people from the Midwest who were dislocated and had come out here for job reasons or health reasons or some combination thereof, because I think like Los Angeles was recommended to a lot of people who were like sickly because of the fresh air and the citrus or whatever it was. So you had all of these dislocated Midwesterners who were kind of like far from home and maybe lonely and just like trying to make it. And then you had Aimee, who was an Ontario girl by birth, who had, some that, like, if you're from Ontario, there's some Midwestern vibes up there. And here she is, like, preaching the gospel and kind of bringing people together and maybe helping a lot of these dislocated Midwesterners feel a sense of home. That had never occurred to me. And frankly, like, this hugely popular religious movement as part of the founding of Los Angeles was not something that I totally had on my radar, because I got to be honest, I know Los Angeles is kind of a spiritual laboratory as it stands now. It's like that's what I kind of love about it, is that people can kind of be anything. But I just didn't have locked in my head how big of a Christian foundation this place has.
Yeah, I mean, the revivals took place on Azusa Street, which is in Little Tokyo, if you ever want to go down there. And it's not, I mean, it's considered the founding of Pentecostalism, which now 650 million people call themselves Pentecostal charismatic Christians. That's a quarter of the world's Christians. So it's just monumental. And so you would think like, oh, there must be like a statue or something, right? And you go down and there's like, my optometrist used to be right next to Azusa Street, and there's it's an alley with a little plaque, like, I don't know, 4x2 or something that says like Azusa Street Revivals next to like 7 dumpsters. Like that's, it's just
welcome
like
to Los Angeles.
Exactly. Like, what we value here.
I was going to say, no town loves history more.
I mean, yeah, but it's incredible. And I think that Aimee, there's so many things in what you just said. I mean, California in general, I think Rebecca Solnit has like written about this so beautifully. I think California is a place where like the future does happen for whatever reason. And that whatever reason is complicated. It's a place where there is a little bit of like dislocation and disconnection from, sort of embedded ways of being. So, you think about these people who were coming here, who came to see Aimee, they had probably gone to a Methodist or even a Baptist church back home. And they're disconnected from that church, from that community, from their family. And she offered them something completely new and something that really valued them. Like they were very important. You could have these individualized experiences, like the Holy Spirit could reach in and take you over, not like, some high up clergy person, but like you were specifically chosen. And I think like that sense of destiny, that sense of possibility. I mean, it is also like, in terms of technology, Aimee was one of the first women to hold a radio license, one of the first Christian radio stations, which she started in 1924 in Los Angeles. And it was, heard up and down the West Coast. People could hear it in Hawaii. I loved learning about radio for this book, like the early days of radio, because it is like, you think about, like, a lot of spiritual people were very interested in radio because it's like this disembodied voice, I mean, it how could it not seem anything but magical, And there's a famous quote about radio at that time where they called it the hand on the doorknob to every living room in America, right? It's just this sense of like connection to the masses. And so it's also, I mean, this is also what's so interesting is she's coming to Los Angeles at this moment that the film industry is taking off, like the radio industry, but it's also the beginning of mass, like there isn't quite this sense of being able to reach people the way there starts to be. So this is like the very like sort of modern 20th century thing about her, right? Like she, as I said, she always wanted the biggest microphone possible, but she had a sense of what an audience could be that I think had not been sort of cognized before. Like she wanted to preach to the whole world. And I think by the 1930s, she had preached to 1 out of 10 Americans, right? So it's just this incredible sense of reach, and technology is almost this like divinely given magical thing, Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I love those. Like, I was just like, it was calling to mind for me these old like archival photographs that you'll see of like, the golden age of radio when that was sort of the new thing. And you'll see these families sitting in a living room and they're all looking at the radio while they're listening to it. Like that, for some reason that always like makes me like smile. But I want to talk about, again, this time and this place and how all of these different things sort of converged and how Aimee was able, I think, to absorb and integrate these influences in new and kind of visionary ways. And it's almost impossible to read this book and to not go down an internet rabbit hole. Like I spent a long time, like there's so many great photos of her.
Yeah, they're crazy.
Which people of that era, not necessarily would there be a ton of photos, but she was photographed and photographed beautifully. Like they're high resolution,
Yeah, yeah.
And there is something magnetic even of like still images of her. She draws you in, and to me, it's impossible to look at these old photographs and even some old like YouTube archival like films of her where she's talking and you can hear her voice. I can't look at any of it without thinking of like golden age Hollywood.
Yeah.
The outfits, the presentation, the hairdo. She could, like if you transposed her onto the silver screen as like the star of like a Billy Wilder movie or something, I'd be like, totally. Like that is what she was. She was this kind of blend of megachurch, preacher, Hollywood starlet, and I don't know, girl from Canada. Like what else would there be?
Yeah. I mean, she definitely played up her small town roots. That was definitely a piece of it. But no, I mean, all those people were also coming to her shows. So there was a lot of like cross-pollination happening back then. I mean, the Hollywood would come. I mean, Charlie Chaplin was a regular at her Sunday night illustrated sermon. So just to fill in this piece, she built the Angelus Temple in 1923. It's arguably the first megachurch in America. It sat 5,300 people, but often would serve 15,000 people in a day, right? 3 services, loudspeakers outside, and the radio station. So just 26 departments, huge emphasis on entertainment.
And can I just interrupt real quick? Because that was another piece of the Hollywood of it all.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting and a little bit contradictory because Aimee, as you said earlier, was sort of advocating against like dancing, right?
Right.
It's kind of like a footloose person. but her church services, like I forget how big the bands were, but like a 300 person chorus, and live music, and there would be like camels on stage, like she was incredibly theatrical in the way that she kind of entertained the masses. And like, to me, that feels sort of like prophetic and visionary and very much like tied to what was happening on the ground in LA.
Oh yeah. Yeah. She was taking kind of, the gospel and these stories that had been, sort of either read or preached in small little churches around America. And she was suddenly making them mega, like she's illustrating them as there's sound, there's music. And you can just imagine in 1920, at this point, like film is still silent. Like it was transportive, people are just suddenly they're inside, they're in Palestine, they're living out this biblical truth. And she loved that. I mean, she was born for it. I mean, she had done acting in high school, and she loved an audience. I mean, this was like one thing her archivist said, I was looking when I was researching, trying to find like personal letters and journals, things like that. And they were like, no, like there was not like an interior. I mean, I could be wrong, but that was what I was told, like not a strong interior life. Like if she had a thought or a sense of something, she was like, I need to pump it out to the audiences. Right. So they buried her in an open casket with a telephone on top of her. I can't remember if that's pictures in the book. It's a crazy photograph.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Cause she would just call, like, she'd be like, oh, I have an idea. Like, she just her thing was like, just to get it out to the masses immediately. So just that impulse it's so important. And the church itself is also important because it was a place that was at once incredibly grand and palatial and kind of royal and, very elevated, columns and silks and crushed seashells in the ceiling, and just this like, a very elevated experience that was built by the same people who built Grauman's.
You mean Grauman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood
yeah.
Boulevard?
Yeah, like it was the construction company that specialized in movie palaces. So it's got this kind of, also kind of like rickety, I don't know, like, yeah, something. But she, at the same time, it was supposed to feel like an outdoor revival, right? Like it was also supposed to give you that feeling, like the ceiling was painted like the sky, and you were supposed to come in and feel this kind of like openness. So she's kind of playing with these two aspects of like elevated and civilized and urbane, and also kind of transcendent and connecting to nature and connecting to the Holy Spirit. And I think that was sort of her secret sauce, right? So even the radio is like, it's state-of-the-art technology, but it's also like this disembodied voice that's coming into your head, So she really was good at playing with those altitudes, I would say. So
we can't get to everything, but I do want to talk about maybe some of the darker aspects of her, and her, like you say, her inner life isn't like super well documented. So some of this is going to be speculative, but as a way of kind of getting into that part of the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about your professional background as a journalist, because I think you mentioned earlier you went to divinity school. You also have a master's in journalism from Columbia. You have worked as a journalist, like writing for the Los Angeles Times and like a bunch of like national magazines. You've done a bunch of celebrity profiles and that kind of thing. And there's, I underlined something you said, and I forgive me for not remembering where it is. It might be in the book, but you say, I saw up close how fame so often becomes a sickness, almost a madness. And I think that maybe that speaks to what ultimately happened to Aimee, because she was a celebrity and she had an enormous amount of pressure on her and like eyeballs on her, and people coming to her asking her to lay hands on them and heal them of like terminal illnesses and all kinds of maladies, save my child, all this stuff. That would be a heavy thing for somebody to have to bear. And she bore it constantly for many, many years. And as we get closer to 1926, that was the quote unquote kidnapping, right? Mm-hmm. She had been through her marriage to Robert Semple, which I think, he was a true love of hers. That was the way I read it. And I think his death was really tragic for her. And he also kind of set her in some ways on her course, right?
Yeah, I think he's one of the first ones who said you should preach, which was powerful.
So then, and then there's Harold, which that was an unhappy relationship largely. And then, I think after, this is later after the kidnapping, there was a third like brief marriage to David Hutton, who was like an actor and a musician. And it seemed kind of like a shady character. But in 1926, just to use this as a lens through which to kind of examine maybe some of the more difficult aspects of Aimee's life and her interior, it just feels to me like she was maybe a little bit unlucky in love, but was also kind of searching. Like there was a hole that she was trying to fill. And I think like she was a human being. So it seems like she was having an affair with, what's the guy's name? I'm going to blank on it. The guy who worked for
Kenneth Ormiston. He was her employee.
Yeah.
Her radio operator.
Okay. So let's just get into the weeds a little bit because she goes to Venice Beach with her assistant of a woman, right?
Yeah. She goes down to, it was May 18th, 1926. And she goes down to the beach and it's become something that she does. Like she goes down there just to blow off steam and to swim. And she rents the little tent on the beach some afternoons. And she's down there in her bathing suit and she's working on a sermon on light and darkness. And she sends her assistant away to buy candy and orange juice and to make a phone call for her. And she goes into the water to swim and she disappears. And, her assistant searches for her, alerts the lifeguards, alerts the hotel manager. People are searching. And it very quickly becomes, just a huge story in Los Angeles.
How many people showed up at the beach in Venice?
By the third or fourth day, it was 40,000, I think. Just huge numbers. I mean, it's like if Kim Kardashian disappeared into the ocean, like people.
Kim Kardashian also.
Yes.
Remarkable preacher.
Yes. Incredible. Well, I did think about Kris Jenner a lot with Aimee's mother.
Well, I mean, that goes to like the influencer part of it all,
Well, and the reason that is because Aimee, because I've obviously thought about this, Aimee used herself as the product, so to speak, right? Like her most common sermon was the story of my life. On the magazine and the newsletters, it was often her picture on the front page, a la Oprah. Like she was doing this thing that has now become common practice of like, it's through me, you can experience this entire world, right? Like she's the sort of portal through which you pass, but it is essentially selling herself as herself and her story and her life. So, and to your point, like she, on that day in 1926, she did not have a lot of privacy. She was 35 years old that day and just no private life. She'd been married twice and she was in her prime, I would say, but, lived in a little apartment connected to the church with her mother and her two kids. And, on one hand, she's kind of worshipped at every corner. People are, see her as sort of a walking divine figure. And on the other hand, she just you don't see a lot of space for her just to be a regular person.
Yeah, she's a celebrity and she's kind of caged by it. And, my read on the kidnapping, and that's kind of the fun of her story and the fun of your book is like trying to interpret what happened. I think that people will be trying to interpret what happened like forever, right? We never really got the clear resolution, but it does seem to me like she was having an affair with Ormiston and they absconded to Carmel and they were kind of having like a tryst or, like, cause he was married.
He was married. He was sort of a cad. I think he had been kind of like maybe unfaithful to his wife previously in ongoing fashion. Yeah, I mean, this is just interesting to me. Like this, since the book has been out for about a month and a half or so, and it's there is no answer. She told the same story her whole life, that she had been kidnapped on the beach that day. And the district attorney of Los Angeles brought 2 cases against her that were ultimately unsuccessful. And I did my best in researching this book to present all the evidence that I could find in both directions and show both sides of the story. But it has been really interesting to me, not universally, but in some of the reviews, I feel like I've been kind of knocked for not stating explicitly or condemning her. And I'm sort of mystified by that, honestly, because I feel like, first of all, when people are asking for her to be condemned, they're asking her for her to be condemned based on all the evidence that they read in the book that I wrote. You know what I mean? So I'm like, well, first of all, if you're so convinced, why?
I mean, it does seem like I think the part of it was when that woman came forward from Carmel, right? And there was like some piece of like there was something
about the schizophrenic doppelganger,
maybe
Lorraine
so.
Wiseman.
At that point, I was like, okay, they were just having a love affair in Carmel. Like, that was where my head went.
You're like, okay, but that's when I'm like, this is like true Coen brothers. There's the blind lawyer who's the only eyewitness to the kidnappers, who then ends up drowning in a ditch of a foot of water, down by the airport or something, or by the harbor. I mean, it's just a crazy. You could never make this stuff up. What happened?
Okay, so
yes,
like we just have to press pause, because where my head goes is that, let's just say that she and this guy were in Carmel, and that then it would have had to have been orchestrated. Like, I'm going to be in Venice, I'm going to just vanish. I don't know. I guess maybe she was like having a breakdown, or she was just sick of it all. This is not unprecedented in the history of fame for somebody who's like under like the spotlight to just be like, I need out. Like I'm burnt out, basically. Yeah. So I can understand like the emotional logic. And then she's also in love, and she was kind of somebody who was a romantic. Like, I think she was a romantic.
Capacious, I would say.
Yeah. So if this is true, and they go to Carmel, and I'm imagining they're probably aware that her disappearance will create a lot of headlines. And they were probably aware of it while they were there. I could imagine this guy. What's his name again? McPherson.
Kenneth Ormiston. And there were they had newspapers delivered every day from Los Angeles
So they're aware. And then at some point she's like, holy shit, like what are we going to do? Like, if we're up here, like, I don't want to be outed for having an affair with a married man. I'm a woman of God. And I could imagine her being like, I'll walk out of the desert like a prophet. Because what ultimately ends up happening is that she walks out of the Mexican desert, I believe, to like Douglas, Arizona, or near the border where Douglas, Arizona is. And she like collapses at the doorstep or whatever of some Mexican guy and is like, help me.
Yeah.
And says she's
like,
kidnapped.
she's like, hey, can I have a telephone?
Not water.
No water. She never asked for water. She asked for a telephone, which is very on brand in my mind.
Yeah. She's like, walked 22 miles out of the desert. Yeah. And she's like, I just need a phone.
Yeah. Just please, I got to talk to somebody.
So that's a little suspicious. But like, the point is that this is where like I get it as like an act of desperation to preserve what she's built and to make sure that she does not fall, like her ministry does not fall.
Yeah.
It makes an emotional sense, but it's also like, wow, this is a woman who's willing to go to great lengths to like fool people, if that were the case.
I think, my theory is probably pretty close to that. I also think I have a friend who's Cuban, and he read the book and he was like, oh, this reminds me so much of when I defected. And I memorized a story about what happened that was false. And I lived that story. Like, I would pass a lie detector test. Like, I have memories of what happened to me. Like, I fully inhabited that lie. Like, it's as real to me as my memories. And I feel like there's some of that. She told the same story for the rest of her life, exactly the same, usually start to finish. And I think that, why did she go away? Why did she come back? That's not something that we can know. We can guess at. I mean, she did in her later life continue to have a number of, as she called them, mental breakdowns. She was somebody who had a lot of highs and lows, and she was a conjurer, so to speak. She was somebody who spent her life interpreting the unseen. So I think all of those skills probably came to bear during this experience. But I also think it's just sort of fascinating that maybe 1926, May 18th, 1926 is like a moment in time where an incredibly famous person thought that they could disappear,
Right.
And you're like, it was, and she couldn't, I think that's the part that we have to think back on what the world was like. Like, I think she actually thought she could vanish. There's some evidence of that she thought, I mean, obviously, and she did kind of like that she could get away with it.
How long was the time span between disappearance?
35 days.
35 days. Yeah.
35, 36. Yeah.
Well, I think that her life and her work, I was saying this, I think, before we came on, they are like an almost like uncannily perfect synthesis of everything that you're interested in. We talked, I mean, as a professional and as a person, right?
Yeah.
You have this degree, you went to divinity school.
Yeah.
You've been a journalist covering celebrities. And, we talked about your first book, it's Greetings from Utopia Park.
Yeah.
Which is about your upbringing in the transcendental meditation community and the town in Iowa. Is it Fairfield?
Yep.
And so you grew up in a religious community, and this has been an interest of yours that you come by like personally and professionally. And you have said that you, like, as I think an outgrowth of your education and your upbringing, have become obsessed with what happens when we treat people as gods on earth. And I think that applies to celebrities, right? A lot of times we deify celebrities on some level, but I think when you're a religious celebrity, like she was, people really did treat her like a god, like put your hands on me and like heal me of my sickness and stuff. Like, again, that's a heavy burden to carry. I could imagine her just like being like, I need out. Like, I can't bear this anymore.
I mean, that was, the experience I had in doing my first book. I grew up with a guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who sort of was like the, our reason for being. My mom moved us to this tiny town in Iowa in 1983 from New York City. And it was because Maharishi had put out the call for people to come and move there. He had started a university there and was asking people to come there and meditate in large groups. And I went to the Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment, and, everything about the way we lived was ordered by Maharishi's knowledge. I didn't actually learn that much in school. Like, it was like the science of creative intelligence, or Maharishi's like 32 principles of X or 16 principles of Y. Like, everything was about Maharishi's knowledge. Like, I was completely immersed in it. And so I grew up with him, and he never was there, right? He was in India or he was in Europe, and he didn't ever come. He would just visit us via telecast. And so it was like a very Wizard of Ozzy existence, like very top down. And in reporting that first book, I mean, originally I hadn't even wanted to do a memoir. I wanted to do like an investigative thing on Maharishi, but I was told that would not sell. But I became like weirdly sympathetic to him while researching it, and sort of getting these little glimpses of what it must have been like to be him. And I think that experience I took with me into this book, right? Like, we have this idea of these people on a stage, and we're like, oh, they're crazy, or they're abusive, or they're monsters. I mean, and sometimes they really are. I'm definitely not offering a free pass to abusive behavior, but, there's a lot of people who I feel like they get further and further alienated from the world around them, the higher up we place them. And I think that experience with like thinking about Marici as a regular person who had ambition and, you know, secret desires and wanted things and felt conflicted about stuff. I think that was something I carried with me with Aimee, where, you know, and on top of that, I sort of probably projected, you know, like, I'm like, oh, I also am a mother with 2 children, and I find it pretty hard to be in the world sometimes. And I don't always like the way that I'm expected to be or not be, you know, like it can be a very flattening experience, I would say. And so I think that was a sense I had of Aimee, you know, when she disappeared and afterwards, of like, she had been sort of ruptured from herself, right? And there's also like a thing, I just recently read Audition, Katie Kitamura's book, and I was like so into it. It actually weirdly completely dovetailed with my, like, a lot of the questions in my book of like, when you're performing, like, where does the performance end and the real person begin? And if you're performing all the time, or if you're being treated a certain way all the time, like, belief is very powerful. I mean, that's a big part of this book and my interest in religion. And like, you can become untethered from yourself. And I think that is what you see in Aimee's story. I mean, you were saying like, oh, there's so many photographs of her, but if you look at photographs of her from 1918 and 1938, like, it's a completely different person. Like, she physically transformed. She became another person. And that's what I think is just so fascinating, right? Is that she was like, we think so much about like what celebrities or religious leaders do to shape like their followers, but what do the followers do that shape them? I think that's like fascinating.
Well, that's the thing, is that if people get into celebrity, like pursuing it, like in whatever context, whether you're a religious person or you're you know, an actor or something, not really understanding its implications. And it would be hard to understand them if you, I guess, if you didn't grow up with it. Maybe if you have a parent who's famous, it would be more clear to you.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, by the time people realize what a trap fame is, it's too late. And I think when there's a lot of money at stake and there's like this sense of, you know, cultural currency and power, and there's just this excitement, and there's this person, this celebrity at the center of it all, who doesn't get told no a lot.
Yeah.
And oftentimes is surrounded by people who might not have their best interest at heart, despite their like protestations or their you know, they imply otherwise. And it's like a machine kind of builds, like a human machine builds around you, and it kind of insulates you from the world, but it also isolates you.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can't get into all of it, but I mean, there is a rupture between Minnie, Aimee's mother, and Aimee.
Yeah.
And I think part of maybe Aimee's decline, like mental health wise and just health wise generally, had to do with the loss of trust, like the trusted people around her who cared about her and could help her operation run smoothly.
Yeah. I mean, and people, you know, it's sort of, I mean, fame can feel, I think, also like a psychological experiment, right? And so once she's, you know, she doesn't have her family with her, she's got a lot of creatures in her life, so to speak, like kind of mercenary figures. And that's where she started to run into a lot of trouble. She had something like 37 lawsuits over a dozen years, and the church finances, you know, get into the red. I mean, it's during the Great Depression, but the way that people are treating her really changes. And I think her sense of self changed with it. And it's an interesting, like, you know, she makes some choices towards the end of her life that that you see kind of over and over. And I think this might cast some light also on her decision to come back in 1926. But over and over, she forgoes intimacy and personal connection for the institution.
Which is a decision to be alone.
So, and she ends up alone essentially, but it is, I mean, the church today has 8 million members. Like she made a choice, and that choice is what it is. And honestly, it's often thought of as a very male choice, I think. She lets her family, I mean, her son stays with her, but it's kind of funny because she really wanted this matriarchal power. She wanted her daughter to take over, and she ends up ruptured from her daughter, and it's her son who runs the Angelus Temple and the Foursquare organization for 5 decades. But he was definitely like runner up. But I think, she chooses not to have the connections and instead to sort of have legacy and institution. And that's kind of bittersweet too, because, as we said at the beginning, like her legacy is complicated. And because of that complexity and because of this dark side, because of the scandal, she's not really embraced, she's not like deified in Foursquare. There's a little picture of her up, but they don't talk a lot about her. She's not a big part of like, sort of evangelical Christian history. Like she's not somebody who gets brought up a lot. And I think it is because of this darkness and because of the scandal and the contradictions. She was not a straightforward figure. But what she wanted was actually to be remembered.
Well, and she is beautifully in this book. She's an interesting figure, like an incredibly compelling figure to this day. And you did a wonderful job with the book. I'm curious, just as a personal matter. I mean, I know you've written a little bit about this, but as somebody who grew up in Fairfield and was part of the TM community and has had I think it turns like anywhere from like negative feelings to mixed feelings to positive feelings. You've kind of been all over the place with it. And then you write this book about Aimee and you kind of spend a lot of time in the life and the mind and the heart of somebody who is like a true believer. Like, where are you with like the woo woo of it all? Like, are you still meditating? Are you feeling God is a thing? Are you completely atheist? Like, where are you on the spectrum now?
Thank you for asking. I've been really regular in my meditations, Brad. And by that, I mean, I meditate once a day. So I'm like forever, backsliding because I should be meditating twice a day, but I
the second one is harder. I find
I can't do it. Yeah. I
once you get started.
Yeah. Yeah. I like an afternoon meditation. And I recently went to go see a Hilma af Klint show of her drawings at MoMA in New York. And, she was a theosophist. She was very into Rudolf Steiner and seances. And she did a series over the course of 2 years where she talked to flowers. So that's my new thing. I'm getting into that, Brad.
Talking to flowers.
Well, I haven't talked to any yet, but I would like to. That's my new.
People who do ayahuasca come out of it and they're like,
oh my God.
The plants told me that they are in charge. Like I hear that over and over again. They talk to the plants.
I did ayahuasca and I was like, oh, the world is death and ruin. And why do I want to, my life is utterly meaningless. All life is just growth and collapse. Like, why? Don't recommend. I'm always like, who are these people who have Mother Aya come and embrace them? I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
I saw the truth and it's dark. So that's why I'm going to just try and talk to the hollyhocks.
Talk to the flowers. Meditate a little bit. You wrote about, I got to say too, I read what you wrote about David Lynch after he passed away this past winter, and you had profiled him and you kind of write about that experience, and it was maybe at a lower ebb in your relationship to TM, right? Am I remembering this correctly?
Well, yeah, I mean, oh my God, I'm making a lot of sounds. It's like, is this a complicated answer? I still have a lot of cynicism about the TM movement. Just to be totally clear, even the Rolling Stone headline that they put on that article I wrote after he passed was I argued with David Lynch. Turns out he was right. And I'm I so want to put a little asterisk and be right about a lot of things, but not everything. There's still a lot of stuff I was totally right about that's completely crazy. Just as a heads up. So my cynicism, do not worry, it's fully intact. It's operational and moving through the world with lightning speed.
Good to hear. Yeah. It's good to hear. I'm the same way. I go through it's fluctuation, constant fluctuation But what I will say, because I don't think, I mean, I always say I'm Buddha-ish, like if I had to put a name on it. But I do believe in meditation, if for no other reason, then I think it is really good for me, and I think for maybe a lot of people, to just sit down and be quiet.
Yeah.
Like we're never still and quiet. It's good to be still and quiet and talk to flowers. Like,
right. I mean, for me, I think it gives me a sense of self that's disconnected from my thoughts. Like that's the thing I really like go to it for, is like the kind of screed in my head going, and to kind of unplug from that and feel like another space that is more available to speak to flowers.
But don't do ayahuasca.
No. I mean, I don't know. Lots of people do it. We're in California, and there's people who are like sipping on that tea every day, but I don't know. I believe I saw the truth, unfortunately, and I don't think I want to ever see that truth again.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I loved your book. I'm very happy to have the chance to talk with you about it and to have you back on the show. And I always end by asking people if they have anything else in the works. If you're just celebrating the publication of this one, like no pressure, but is there another book in the pipeline or something that like is like an inkling for you at this point, or no?
Yeah. I mean, I've been working pretty much in parallel the whole time I was working on this book on a novel.
Oh.
So
can you, I would never ask you to synopsize it, but can you at least tell me what like some of its concerns are?
Yeah, it's a lady detective yoga sex cult.
Like sold. That's like my perfect book. I feel like this is.
I know it may just be like my play. It's like I'm not actually talking to flowers. I'm just writing that book.
Does it have a title? Did we have a title? Because I feel like what you just said could be the title, and I feel like it would sell 1 million copies. But
it's right now. It's called The Now, which is the name of the
cult.
Yeah.
God, I love cult stories. Love them.
I do too. I mean, I actually have to like. It's a thrill for me because, and I'm working on this right now because I actually weirdly have been not that good at doing it, but to like at last get to make up my own religion.
Yes.
After all these fucking years of like either living under one or reporting about them or researching or like, you know, like I feel like I know about every fucking religion, and now I'm like, now it's time for mine.
This is your Dianetics. This is
exactly.
You'll start your own movement.
Yes. Your words to God's ears.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for the time. Congratulations on Sister Sinner, and best of luck with The Now.
Thank you, Brad. I love this.
All right, there we have it. That was Claire Hoffman talking with me about her new book, Sister Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson. It is available from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. It is excellent. And that was a totally fascinating conversation with Claire. My thanks to her. You can find more information about Claire Hoffman and her work at clairehoffman.com. You can follow her on Instagram. One more time, the new book is called Sister Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson. Go get your copy right now. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. You can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram, and you can sign up for my weekly email newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. If you love this show, if you listen regularly and you get something from it, I hope you will join the Other People Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you want to get an Other People t-shirt or a sweatshirt, or you want to join my book club, you can do all of the above at otherppl.com. If you want to sign up for the wait list for How to Write a Novel, the debut course from Deep Dive, my new company, you can do that at www.deepdive.audio. Finally, if you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out, please give this show a rating wherever you listen. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is, rate it, review it. It helps the show find new listeners. Okay, so coming up on Thursday, I will be back with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for another episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, the weekly pop culture assessment from the Otherppl show. It's always interesting. Brad and Mira coming up on Thursday.